Single dad bought an old bakery after losing everything. Then the CEO who fired him walked in. Griffin Holt had been kneading dough at Ashford and Vine Bakery for 4 months. When the door chimed and the last person he expected to see in his shop walked in off the street, checking her phone, not even looking up yet, he recognized her immediately. The sharp, efficient posture, the dark hair cut precisely at the jaw, the particular way she carried a leather bag like it contained decisions rather than belongings. Vanessa Kirkland, the CEO who'd fired him from Kirkland Data Systems 8 months earlier, in a restructuring announcement delivered over email, effective immediately. No severance beyond the legal minimum, 17 years of loyal work reduced to a paragraph, and a box of his belongings shipped to his apartment. Griffin's hands went still in the dough for just a moment. Then he kept working, because the bread wouldn't proof itself, and because he'd promised himself, the day he signed the papers on this bakery, that he wasn't going to let anyone from his old life, least of all her, take one more thing from him, including his composure. He'd lost nearly everything in the 18 months before he bought Ashford and Vine. The layoff from Kirkland Data Systems had come first, cutting the salary that supported him and his 10-year-old daughter Nadia since his divorce 3 years earlier. Then, in a stretch of bad luck that felt almost engineered, his car had been totaled by an uninsured driver. His apartment building had been sold and his lease terminated, and a medical scare with Nadia resolved, eventually, but not before draining what little savings remained had left him further behind than he'd been at any point since his 20s. What he'd had, through all of it, was a decade-old habit his grandmother had taught him, baking bread, slow and patient, the kind of work that couldn't be rushed or automated or restructured out from under him. He'd started selling loaves at a farmer's market to make rent. Then he'd started selling more than he could make in his apartment kitchen. When Ashford and Vine, a struggling, century-old bakery 2 blocks from his old apartment, came up for sale, at a price that matched almost exactly the severance and savings he had left, Griffin had taken every remaining dollar he owned and bet it on flour and yeast, and the one skill nobody had ever been able to lay him off from. 4 months in, the bakery was breaking even, barely, and Griffin had never once regretted the decision, even on the mornings he opened at 5 a.m. After getting Nadia off to a neighbor's for early drop-off, Vanessa Kirkland looked up from her phone as she reached the counter, and Griffin watched recognition land on her face in real-time surprise. Then, something more complicated, harder to read. Griffin. She said his name carefully, like she was double-checking it against memory. I didn't expect. She glanced around the shop at the shelves of bread, the flour dusting his apron, clearly recalibrating an image of him that had apparently stayed frozen at a desk in her company's data division. You own this place. Bought it 5 months ago, he said, keeping his voice level professional, the same tone he'd use with any customer. Opened 4 months back. What can I get you? Vanessa hesitated, some of her usual crisp efficiency faltering slightly. I'm actually here to meet someone. A local supplier. Kirkland's opening a small satellite office 2 blocks from here. And I'm scouting vendor relationships for the building's ground floor retail space. Someone recommended this bakery specifically for the coffee cart concession. She paused. I didn't realize the recommendation would lead back to you. Griffin kept kneading, unhurried. Small world. The supplier meeting, as it turned out, was with Griffin himself, a detail. Neither of them had connected until Vanessa's assistant, arriving a few minutes later, clarified the appointment. Kirkland Data Systems was opening a new downtown office, and the building's ground floor retail space needed a coffee and pastry vendor for the lobby concession. Someone in Vanessa's real estate team had scouted local bakeries independently. Entirely unaware of Griffin's history with the company, and Ashford and Vine had come up as the strongest local option. Quality, reliability, proximity, a growing reputation in the neighborhood that had nothing to do with who used to sit in a cubicle 2 floors below Vanessa's office. Vanessa sat across from Griffin at a small table near the window, visibly uncomfortable in a way Griffin had never once seen from her during their years working together. I want to be honest, she said. This is awkward for me. I let you go 8 months ago in a restructuring that, if I'm being fully transparent, was handled badly. Not the decision itself. The market data, at the time, genuinely supported consolidating your division. But the execution, an email, No conversation. 17 years, and I let HR handle it like a line item. Griffin studied her for a moment, surprised by the admission. That's more self-awareness than I expected to hear from you, honestly. I've had time to think about it, Vanessa said. More than you'd probably guess. She glanced down at her hands. The restructuring didn't go the way the board projected. We lost too much institutional knowledge too fast. I've spent the better part of this year rebuilding relationships and processes that, frankly, people like you used to hold together without anyone upstairs fully appreciating it. She didn't apologize outright, some old instinct in her still resisted that particular vulnerability in a business context. But what she offered instead was, in its own way, more meaningful, a genuine, unhurried conversation about what the layoff had actually cost him, listened to without defensiveness, and an honest acknowledgement that the coffee cart proposal in front of her had nothing to do with guilt or charity. I'm not offering you this contract because of what happened, she said firmly. I want to be clear about that, because I don't want you thinking this is an apology dressed up as a business deal. Ashford and Vine's bread is genuinely the best in this neighborhood. My real estate team flagged you independently. I'm here because it's a good business decision. Full stop. Good, Griffin said, because I wasn't going to take it if it was charity. I've got a contract with 3 other offices already. I don't need Kirkland's business to survive. Something in Vanessa's expression shifted respect, unmistakable, the particular kind reserved for someone who'd rebuilt something entirely on their own terms. No, she said slowly. I don't imagine you do. The negotiation that followed was entirely professional terms, volume, delivery schedules, pricing conducted with a directness that both of them, in their own way, found almost a relief after the emotional weight of the conversation preceding it. Griffin didn't discount his prices out of old loyalty. Vanessa didn't push for concessions out of lingering guilt. They settled on terms that made sense for both businesses. Nothing more, nothing less. And Griffin found himself, by the end of the meeting, feeling something he hadn't expected to feel in this particular reunion. A kind of clean, uncomplicated closure. For what it's worth, Vanessa said, gathering her things as she stood to leave. The company's worse without people like you in it. I mean that as a straightforward assessment, not a sentimental one. I appreciate that, Griffin said, but I'll be honest. I don't miss it. Not the job anyway. This, he gestured around the bakery, at the shelves of bread, the smell of the ovens, the small, steady rhythm of a business built entirely by his own hands. This is the first work in a long time that's actually felt like mine. The Kirkland coffee cart contract became one of Ashford and Vine's steadiest accounts over the following year. A reliable volume order that helped Griffin finally hire his first part-time employee and extend the bakery's hours enough to stop opening alone at 5 inches the morning every single day. He and Vanessa settled into an easy, purely professional relationship. Occasional check-ins about delivery schedules, nothing more. Both of them content to let the specific chapter of employer and former employee stay firmly closed. Nadia, now 11, took to helping at the bakery on weekends, learning her great-grandmother's bread recipes, the same unhurried way Griffin had learned them. Flour on her hands, sleeves rolled up, proud in a way that had nothing to do with anyone's restructuring decision, and everything to do with watching her father build something entirely his own out of the wreckage of losing almost everything. Do you ever think about going back? Nadia asked him once, kneading a small piece of dough beside him at the counter. To the old job, I mean, if they asked. Griffin considered the question honestly, the way he tried to answer all of Nadia's question. No, he said. Some doors close, and it turns out that's actually the best thing that ever happened to you. You just don't always know it while it's happening. Nadia nodded, satisfied, and went back to her dough. And outside the window, the late afternoon light caught the shelves of fresh bread, steam still rising faintly off the newest loaves. Proof, if Griffin needed it, of exactly how far he'd come from an email that once tried to tell him his 17 years of work amounted to a line item on someone else's spreadsheet. The end.